News First, face to face with Shalan Benedict.
Hello there, very good evening. Welcome to another edition of Face to Face. We're all trying to make sense of what is happening in Sri Lanka's political sphere right now. Parliament was prorogued. Today there are several new appointments that were made. New high-ranking positions, of course, are being filled by the president. There are rumors circulating that it's not a presidential election that's going to come first, but a general election. However, the president has explicitly stated on multiple occasions that what is coming first this year is a presidential election. Well, of course, to try and help us make sense of everything that's happening here in Sri Lanka, we've got with us Dr. Paikiasothy Saravanamuttu. He's the Executive Director of the Centre for Policy Alternatives. Thank you very much, Dr. Paikiasothy, for joining us on our program this evening. So, first things first, today we saw a book being released by former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa saying that him being ousted from the presidency was an international conspiracy. Now, I myself haven't had the opportunity to go through this book or even get my hands on one of it. I don't think you've had
no, I haven't had
the opportunity as well, but there are some news reports coming out where he's gone on to even draw or mention the former army commander, the former director of the SIS, and many other individuals. The title of the book just says that it's a conspiracy. His ousting from the presidency is a conspiracy. So I presume that the book is going to argue that line of thought. Is it a plausible kind of response?
If someone alleges a conspiracy, and here is a conspiracy with regard to regime change, presumably they have the evidence for it. And if they don't have the evidence for it, we can't accept this argument that it was a conspiracy.
And it's all just conjecture.
Absolutely conjecture. You know, if you are saying that someone conspired to get rid of you as president or whatever, you must have the hard evidence, no? Because I understand, as I said, I haven't read the book, I understand that he's talking about an international conspiracy as well. So, you know, where has the evidence been got from? And has it been presented in the book, or is it just conjecture? And is it going to go down very well with whatever remains of his constituency? Or is it going to persuade anyone that this is actually what happened?
And why weren't any of these revealed, of course, when the Supreme Court took up that matter?
Exactly.
Well, all of those aside, I don't think we can really discuss too much about the content of the book, because neither you nor I have really gone through it. So let's move on to try and make sense of what's really happening in Sri Lanka right now. Today, there were two appointments that were made, COPA chairman and COPE chairman. One of the more controversial appointments is the chairman of COPE, Rohita Abegunawardena, has been appointed as the chairman of COPE. We've had many other chairmans of COPE, even the immediate former chairman of COPE, who have performed sort of a yeoman service in keeping state-owned enterprises in check, state-owned enterprises that have run amok, that have caused so much losses to the country, were brought to some sort of a check, some form of, even a minute form of accountability at the COPE hearings. But with this new appointment and, of course, the skepticism surrounding his ability to really perform in that role, what do you see as the role of COPE moving forward in this, at least in the final few months that this parliament is?
Well, I mean, this is the thing, is that given the intense speculation that we will have a general election before we have a presidential election, and that general election might well be in June or July or whatever it is.
That soon?
Well, yes, because we have to have a presidential election between September and October of this year. The idea of putting this particular individual as chairman of this committee may well be to satisfy the SLPP or whatever. But I don't think it's sort of intended as a long-term appointment as such. But then on the other hand, we never know. We may well have the presidential election first, and we can go into next year for a general election.
So are you trying to say that the appointment of Rohita Abegunawardena and the sort of temporary measure that you insinuated surrounding his appointment is indicative that a general election is more likely than a presidential?
Well, I mean, this is not the only indication, and it may not well be an indication.
What are the other indications?
Well, I mean, I think the thing is this, is that the opinion polls keep insisting that Anurukumara Dissanayake and the JVP are on a high, that they are going to win the presidency and that they will win a general election. So, you know, the thing is, if I was the president, and of course I'm not, I would want to expose what their popular support is. And the way of doing it would be to go to a general election. Now, in a general election, the question is going to be, can a single party get 113 seats to form a government of its own?
Okay.
Now, if it is the JVP who emerges as the single largest party without getting 113 seats, who are they going to form a government with? Or are they going to be a minority government? Likewise, if the SJB doesn't get 113, who are they going to form a government with? Yeah. So I think if it exposes the popular support of the SJB and indeed the JVP, the president may well feel that he has a certain advantage. Yeah, that neither of, you know, that the opposition is as disunited as possible, that they can't really come together, and that when a presidential election comes, it's a question of who the anti-JVP forces will rally behind. Is it going to be Ranil Wickremesinghe, the incumbent president, or is it going to be Sajith Premadasa, who can't still lead his party to an electoral victory in a general election?
So you're saying that by holding a general election, the incumbent president will be increasing his chances, whatever they may be, at a presidential election, rather than going into the presidential election directly?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So do you think that even after explicitly informing the people of this country that it's a presidential election that we're going to have this year, that statement has been made time and time again, even in Parliament, it has been affirmed by various other individuals in positions of power, do you think that the president will go back on his word to hold the general election?
The point about politics is nothing is permanent. No, at the end of the day, the power to dissolve Parliament has been given to the president. When he made that statement, he obviously felt that it would be a presidential election. And come on, let's face it, as far as the country is concerned, they are not going to feel cheated if a general election comes first. Because as far as they're concerned, there is a question of the legitimacy of this Parliament. I mean, at the Centre for Policy Alternatives, we just did a survey, and we found out that in terms of trust that people have, political parties only have about 19 to 22%. You know, so the question of infusing political parties and Parliament with greater legitimacy is one that is very clearly on the political agenda. So an early general election will certainly resolve that.
The president continued to reiterate the fact that 40 new pieces of legislation have been passed. There's 60 more to come, so this 60 more might not come if the general election comes along.
60 more may not come, and with regard to the 40 that have come, I think people in the country need to know what these pieces of legislation are and how it impacts on their lives. Because, there is a public perception that this government doesn't have any sympathy or empathy with the people at large. And so if they believe that they're doing the right thing, a good thing, what the country needs, they need to be able to communicate that. And that's what needs to happen. And God knows, maybe it will happen after the Aurudu is over. But it does need to happen in terms of people recognizing that, okay, this government has been passed since 2022 or whatever, and it just doesn't, it hasn't sort of sat on its haunches and done nothing. It has done X, Y, and Z, and X, Y, and Z have had a beneficial impact on their lives. That message needs to go out.
This idea surrounding elections, holding elections, I think this idea was mooted before. Even if my memory serves me right, it was Harshan Rajakarna from the SJB who said it on this program, but I think it was mentioned before also, to hold both elections together or hold two elections together. It was mooted during the, when the local government election was due. That call was to hold the local government election and the provincial council elections together to save money, of course, and expedite the entire process because we're so delayed on holding those elections. Do you think that there is the off chance of the general election and the presidential election being held together?
No, I don't think it will be held together. I mean, the argument for it, of course, is saving money or whatever. But the issue here is about power, about political power, the balance of power. And I think the president and the political parties would want to test their support in the country before they go for the big prize, which is the presidency.
But in the interest of the general public and, of course, having some form of stability in the country, what do you think is, in your opinion, what do you think is the best course of action? Is it to have the presidential election first, then the general, or the general first, then the presidential, or have both of them together?
Frankly, I don't think I have a very definite view on this. The important thing is that both elections are held, and that they're held, one according to the schedule as far as the Constitution is concerned, and the general election, I think, earlier than before Parliament's term expires. Now, because there's a question of legitimacy of this current Parliament.
Now, of course, there is the question, or there are still those who are skeptic about an election being held this year, let alone a general election or a presidential election, any election for that matter. But however, we've seen time and time again, especially during the past decade, a lot of political conspiracies coming into the fore, and the Supreme Court having to intervene on many of these instances and put their foot down and say, this is unconstitutional, this can't be done. We saw that happen during the 52-day government. We saw that happen in many instances, especially during this past decade. And one of the most recent orders that were given by the Supreme Court, an interim order, was to release the money that was allocated in the budget for the year 2023 to hold the local government election. That order hasn't been complied with to date, which resulted in the indefinite postponement of the elections. I don't believe the nominations even have been cancelled as yet. Correct me if I'm wrong. There was discussion going in Parliament, but nothing has been done on that front. So technically, we're still in an election period as far as the black letter law in Sri Lanka is concerned. So for those who have, who are skeptic about an election not being held this year, what then?
Well, with regard to the local government elections and before that the provincial council elections, I think, yes, there are people who want elections and believe that elections should be held on schedule. But I think the vast majority of the people in this country look to the general and the presidential election as being the most important ones.
Okay.
Yeah. With regard to the question of whether the general and the presidential election will be held, the point about the general election is it doesn't have to be held this year. Parliament, it can go on till 2025. With regard to the presidential election, we have a stipulated time period between September and October. Now, if a government wants to not have elections in that period, it will presumably have to go to Parliament and get a two-thirds majority. Some of us will go to court with regard to it, and the courts might well say, look, two-thirds majority plus a referendum. If all of those things are ignored, we could well have another Argalaya. Because the issue with regard to the Argalaya as well is about the legitimacy of our government. And if you're going to muck around with elections, then there is a serious threat to our democracy, and I think after the Aragalaya, people won't accept that.
So the reason why I'm questioning you on this possibility, or probable future at least, is because even last year, I distinctly remember that all political parties were really gearing up for local government elections. Nominations were called. The Elections Commission was ready. And the Elections Commission went so far as to put out a statement saying that there were 15 to 20 attempts by the government to try and postpone the election. It all began with just talking points, discussions about increasing female representation, demarcation, proper demarcation, abolition of the local government bodies as a whole. So those kind of topics were discussed a little bit just a few months ago as well, electoral reforms in the country. Now, once Basil Rajapaksa returned to the island, Udayanga Veeratunga also put up a post saying that he is coming for the general election. So what if the government decides to hold the general election at a very close time period to the presidential election, or when the presidential election is due? You said it's between September and October. So say somewhere around the beginning of September or mid-September. General elections are scheduled during that period. So it technically creates an impossibility for the government to go ahead, or for the Elections Commission per se, to go ahead and hold the presidential election. What then?
You see, when a government ignores the rulings of the highest court in the land, when a government then tries rather tricky means of trying to postpone an election, there is only one alternative that I see as far as the people of the country are concerned. They have to come out on the streets and prevent that. I mean, we can try court actions and whatever it is and say that, look, it's far too close to the presidential election, or you hold both elections at the same time, and all of that. But if a government ignores the rulings of the Supreme Court of the land, then we have to take matters into our own hand, because ultimately sovereignty lies with us, and we are the change we want to make.
Kind of an extreme choice. Let's hope and pray that, of course, it doesn't go there.
Yeah, and no, absolutely, it's an extreme choice because it's an extreme situation.
And would you say that it is a probability, a possibility in the future?
What? Of a government going to postpone the presidential election?
Yes.
No, I don't think so. I think the government will hold the presidential election on time. It's a question of as to whether we will have a general election before that.
So there are political parties coming out now giving the general public certain hints about their policy. There is no concrete statement regarding the policy of any political party that has been put out yet, and rightly so, because the elections have not been announced yet. Judging by what there is to see, what would be, of course, your preferred line of thought, or who do you think is more in sync with what the general public need right now?
Well, the issue with regard to who is in sync, I think, is also being driven by the public opinion polls, which say that the JVP is going to get X number of seats, or, is going to win a general election.
It's going to be whitewash.
That absolute landslide for the JVP, and that Anurukumara Dissanayaka will win 50+1 on the first ballot. And so in that sense, that is the sort of general trend in the country. But, as I used to say, a week is a long time in politics, and if this election is going to be in 8 months' time or in 5 months' time or whatever, a number of things can happen that could change. I don't think all political parties have started their campaigns for an election in earnest, So in that respect, they are talking in broad brushstrokes. I mean, the JVP, for example, says that it will renegotiate the IMF deal.
Okay. Now I think the SJB also says that.
Yeah, so now what parts of the IMF deal are they going to renegotiate?
Not certain.
The JVP, again, says that it will deal with anti-corruption. Now, what is the JVP going to do with regard to money that is out of this country? Because, I say this because, for example, in the Philippines, the money that the Marcoses allegedly stole has not been recovered.
Yet.
Yeah, I think it's less than 10% that has been recovered, and this happened 40 years ago. So then what are they going to go after? The money that
and now
is
their family is back in power.
and the family is back in power. So it's then the money that's supposedly in this country that they're going to go after. Now, you know, you make a promise like that at an election and then you are unable to deliver, then you're going to have a backlash of some sort. Likewise, I mean, the SJB has to make clear what it is that they're going to renegotiate. What are the real differences between their policies with regard to the IMF and whatever, and the policies of the Ranil Wickremesinghe government? You know, that the government has to be, as I said, I think much more empathetic and sympathetic in terms of telling people why we're doing this, how long it's going to take, all of that.
You mean the current government?
The current government.
Okay.
You know, so hopefully all of these things will be clarified once an election campaign, whether it be general or presidential or whatever, commences. Yeah? I mean, you know, some people make the argument, look, if the JVP is so popular, why on earth should it spell out its policies? Because that's only going to get them into needless arguments. You know, so that's politics. But I think
Is it
the
acceptable?
population... Huh?
Is it acceptable, though?
Well, that is for the population to decide. You know, and I think this is the thing, is that is the population going to be discerning enough in terms of saying, look, no, we want to know what your policies are? Or is it the case that, look, we've given the UNP and the SLFP 75 years and they've screwed us up in style. So now it's the time for the next guy. How disillusioned is the population that without wanting to know what exactly the policies are, they're going to vote in one particular direction.
But I think the concern among the population and the reason for this kind of a response, you know, we don't care what your policies are, you know, we're going to give you a go, is partially because the SLFP affiliated other parties, UNP and the breakaways of UNP have been given power for the past 75 years, but also that no government that came into power really stuck to their policies. It was, you know, what can we do today to just make it into tomorrow? Nobody really thought about what should be done tomorrow or the day after or 5 years, 10 years ahead. Nobody really thought about that. It's just, how can I get through the day? How can I ensure that my power is secured today so that I can, you know, last the day?
Yeah. We as a country are terribly bad at planning.
And implementing.
Planning, implementing, and a willingness to make the sacrifices necessary for tomorrow and day after and whatever. You know, and so I think, you know, there is an argument to be made that there is a culture of entitlement. And there's a culture of complaint. I mean, if you look at it, I've read Sri Lankan, free education, free health, job in the public service, you're looked after from womb to tomb. Why would you want to change that? You know.
Well, because now you're not.
That's the thing. And the question, therefore, is that is any government, any political party going to stick with this in order to set things right for the future, or are they going to change because they want to get political power and form a government? And that, I think, is what the population has also got to recognize. But it doesn't happen in most democracies. I mean, people vote for 101 reasons, you know, and it's not a single one. And
so it's not just the lack of political literacy here in Sri Lanka. This is how it's done across the world.
Yes, it's been done across the world, but I think there are sort of different degrees with which it goes. You know, and I mean, for example, there are what? A couple of million people in the United States that still believe that Trump won the last election.
And the case may be that he might win the next.
Well, yeah.
Well, since you spoke about the rising popularity of the National People's Power movement and how the people are, you know, drawn towards it for sometimes the wrong reasons, but hopefully they can clarify these matters and maybe the people will take that into account as well. you've been studying politicians in Sri Lanka, how they act, how they move forward. Judging with the history of the JVP that is being thrown at them time and time again now, do you think that the arguments that are being built by the opposition parties, their oppositions, saying that it'll be a brutal regime, it'll be a socialist regime, it will be something that you didn't even dream of in your wildest dreams, that is going to happen in the future? Do you think that that argument holds any water?
Well, I mean, the only way to meet those criticisms and fears and doubts and all of that is to come out unequivocally, apologize.
I think
if nothing
they've
else.
done that.
Insufficiently.
Insufficiently. Okay.
Insufficiently. Apologize for what they consider themselves responsible for in the past.
Well, that's going to be a long shot, because there is, of course, some ambiguity, at the very least, surrounding the incidents that took place, because there's one interpretation from one party and another from another.
No, look, I mean, we can debate the numbers.
Definitely.
Yeah, but we do know that, yes, the government committed atrocities at that time, and so did the JVP. So what I'm saying here is this, is that if a political party wants to allay fears that it's going to behave like what it did in the past, they must come out and say, look, it's not going to happen again.
So sans
we
an apology, there have been instances where certain forms of apologies were issued, not an official statement, definitely not as adequately as you wanted.
An official
statement. Sans an apology like that, do you believe that then the argument of the oppositions holds some water?
Well, I mean, that's the only thing that they can do. That's the only thing that they can do. They can acknowledge that, yes, they didn't behave as a party should in a democracy.
Well, technically they weren't a party at the time.
Well, or
they were suspended.
A group or whatever. They were suspended, but they still thought about themselves as a party, you know. And they must come out and say that, look, we have turned our back on our past. Yes, we made a mistake. I mean, in 1994, when President Kumaratunga first ran for office, I think she started with an apology for what happened between 1970 and 77.
Okay.
And then she started talking about capitalism with a humane face and all of that. You know? I mean, likewise, for example, I'm sure the JVP will be able to win votes in the north if they change their policy on devolution, for example.
Well, there's only one way that we can really see what happens, and that's once we go into an election, which hopefully will come this time around. Thank you very much, Dr. Paikiasothy Saravanamuttu, for helping us, of course, make sense.
Hopefully I did.
Make sense of what's really happening in the political arena here in Sri Lanka. And it's important that we continue to follow these, because these matters, like it or not, will impact our future, the future of generations to come in Sri Lanka and this beautiful country as a whole. We have been complacent in the past. We have made many mistakes. But let's let those mistakes and failures be the pillars of our success in the future, and vote right, vote smart, make an informed decision at the upcoming elections. Thank you very much for watching. Take care and God bless.